I don't know if I say good day, good morning, good afternoon, whatever the case might be. It's fantastic having everyone on the call today. And I'm super excited to have these two wonderful gentlemen who I've personally known for a very long time, over a decade. I say it with boldness. So this is our 7th live edition of the Global Economic Outlook. And I have a feeling today might be a bit long or short. I don't know what direction it to go, but we are focusing mainly on the Russia-Ukraine crisis as we've known it, and the recent impacts we've seen across global economy. So we'll talk a bit back to history, then we'll talk to sanctions, we'll talk to humanitarian crisis, and then we'll talk to the latest CBN policy that we have going on, which obviously we know is designed with the intention of addressing the current FX shortage that we have here locally, okay? So let me just do a quick introduction of our panelists today. I have Femi Popola. Femi, thank you for joining us. I know it's very early at your side. So Femi is, I don't like to say people are former bankers, because I think once you've been a banker, you're always a banker. It's just right there in your bloodstream. So Femi has headed one of the popular banks, local banks here. He's headed one of their branches. Femi is a political analyst by passion or by natural gifting and wiring. So he can generally speak a lot to geopolitical issues, give us a bit of context and history to the current crisis as we know it. So Femi, thank you so much for joining us. And
good morning, Fumi. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here on the 7th edition. You know what 7 means? The number 7 means. The 7th edition, and I'm hoping to have a wonderful time with everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to us having a good conversation too, as we do. So thank you for coming, Femi. And I have Benga Adu, also another very old friend of mine. Benga is the grandmaster of economics, like we used to say. You know, Benga holds a CFA, so the CFA holder is on CIS, is quite actively involved. He spent over a decade experience in consulting. So you can think of some of the big local firms that we know of, KPMG, Deloitte, PwC's work closely with them. Benga is currently the CFO of one of the leading insurance companies that we have here. And yes, it's from, it has its background in economics from the premier University of Ibadan. So thank you so much, Benga, for joining us today. I know you could have been at another Owambe, but you chose to be here, so it's good. Thank you, Benga.
Thanks, Fumi. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to having a good time too, guys, this morning.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So let's start with the very hot one. And participants, remember, you can put your questions, comments, reactions, thoughts, your own perspective in the chat room, knowing fully well that this is usually conversations. This is people sharing from their own understanding and from their own perspective. So, but we'll get started right away with the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Femi, so just assume I'm probably 8-year-old. I have no context to what's happening, but I sit with my parents at home, probably just watching the news. I'm like, what's really happening with these two brothers? You know, why are they fighting? So just bring it up to speed, because not every one of us took the history class, okay? What exactly is the history to this crisis as we know it? Because we've heard quite a lot of it. So just pull all the puzzle together and summarize and give us a bit of background.
Okay, Fumi, thank you very much. I'm going to try to attempt to explain what's going on in Ukraine and Russia from a historical context and looking at the geopolitics. So basically, we have to go back in time. Ukrainians and Russians are closely related people. There was one time my wife actually asked me what was going on in Ukraine. I gave her a one-liner. I don't think I can do that here. So historically, they share ancestry. That is, Ukrainians and Russians are from the same ethnic origins. That is the Slavic people, or if you like, the Slavonic ethnic group, which is one of the three major ethnic groups in Europe. So somewhere around 800 AD, what is known as Kiev today was founded by Vikings, that's Varangians. And that was the first time the name Rus, from which Russia comes, was mentioned. That is the Kievian Rus. So it's very clear that even Russians trace their ancestry to Ukraine. Okay, and there's a very close relationship between Russians and Ukrainians. In fact, the level of closeness is so high that there's a high degree of intermarriage between them. We have intermarriage occurring at about 17%. So 1 out of every 6 Ukrainians or Russians has in-laws that are across the border. That is for us to just have a context of how close they are. Then the languages, Ukrainian and Russian, are also quite close. They share about 60% of vocabulary. So let me just give you, let me try and bring it into context. Let's say you're a Russian and you've never heard Ukrainian before. When a Ukrainian speaks, you'll be able to pick 5 out of 8 words for a language you haven't heard before. So that is just the level of interrelationship and closeness that the two of them have. Okay, so that's just affinity. So I'm just creating that for you to know that they're really closely related people. Then from there, let's go to geopolitics proper. Ukraine was one of the major countries in the USSR that formed the USSR. So at the breakup of the USSR in 1991, a large number of nations became independent, countries that were before part of the USSR. And I mean, when you're independent, when you leave the house, when you are 18 in this part of the world, or when you are maybe 25 in Nigeria, whatever age it is, you are free to do what you want. You can go and stay outside. So basically, a lot of the former nations of the USSR did not keep ties with Russia. Many of them joined the EU. Many of them joined NATO. A case in point are the Baltic states. You might have heard of them: Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. So the Baltic states, they make a good case for former USSR states because they were able to transform their economy, their political system, their educational system in about 20 years, and they have a relatively high living standard. So they are like the star boys, in quotes, of the former USSR nations. So a lot more of the USSR nations look to their example and want to have closer ties with the West because they feel if they are closer to Western Europe and the US, it will do well for their economies and their nations in particular. So I've already mentioned NATO. I'm sure some of us have heard about NATO before. And there's no way we can mention NATO without talking about the Cold War. NATO was founded in 1949 by Western European nations and the US in a bid to protect themselves from Russian aggression. After the Second World War, a lot of the Eastern and Central Europe was taken over by the USSR. So a lot of nations trying to protect themselves went into this military alliance. So we understand that NATO, I don't know if I've mentioned the meaning of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Did I mention that? Just for people that don't know. So NATO is primarily set because of Russia. So you have an organization that is set because of a threat or a supposed threat. So you now have countries that are former USSR states. Or let me put it this way, let me put it in context. Countries that formed, like provinces that form part of a former country, joining the enemy in quotes, I mean, from the Russian perspective. So the Russian Federation doesn't take kindly to former states that joined the USSR, that joined NATO, sorry. And let's look at it this way. If you are in Central Europe or you're in Eastern Europe, but you don't share a border with Russia, they don't mind so much if you join NATO. But if you are like Ukraine or Georgia, that shares a direct border, it's seen as more of a risk. So let me start off with what happened in 2008, because this Russia-Ukraine crisis actually has a precursor, which is 2008, when Georgia tried to move close to the West, tried to join NATO. Georgia shares a southern border with Russia. And what happened then to Georgia was that something similar. There was a military intervention. Putin calls this one special military, what's it called, operation. So Georgia was invaded just to make sure that it didn't join NATO. That was back in 2008. And the response from the West was to throw Russia out of the G8 then. So they renamed it the G7. So we know that this kind of thing has happened before. But if we want to look closer to Ukraine, we'll have to go back to 2014. That's about 8 years ago. Go back to the Euromaidan. That was a revolution that happened in 2014, where the then president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted in a popular uprising. So the background for that was that Yanukovych was a Russian-backed president of Ukraine. And there was a lot of agitation in Ukraine, like I've mentioned before, to join Europe, to be closer to Europe. There was a treaty that was even signed. It was like a preliminary agreement to join the EU. So Yanukovych led the people on, and last minute to sign the treaty, he did a 180 and then chose to take a loan from Russia. And Ukrainians didn't take that lightly. I'm sure quite a few of us remember that in 2014, there was a lot of rioting, there was a lot of anger, there was a revolution and the center of the revolution was the Maidan Square. For those of us that live in Lagos, I'm sure we know Freedom Square in Ojota. So it's something like that. And to be honest, people in the West actually supported this revolution. We had American senators fly into Ukraine and join them in the revolution. Senator John McCain was there and saying, "We're with you, we support you, you can do whatever you want." So Yanukovych was removed and replaced in a subsequent election by a more Western or US-leaning president, which is Viktor Poroshenko. So Russia did not just, sit back and fold their arms. Immediately, they lost their man in Ukraine. They did two things. First thing was to grab Crimea, which was formerly a Russian. There's a history behind Crimea. It was formerly Russian. It was ceded to Ukraine, but they had to grab Crimea for strategic reasons. Crimea is the only. It gives access to the only warm waters, the seaport, where Russia has their Black Sea fleet, which supports military and commercial purposes in the Black Sea. So they grabbed that through a kangaroo referendum in 2014, and also started inciting separatist movements in the eastern part of Ukraine. Now, for those that are familiar with Ukraine, the Donbass region, which is a composition of Luhansk and Donetsk. For the football fans here, I'm sure you heard Shakhtar Donetsk before. That's where Shakhtar is from. It's a very rich area of the country, highly industrialized. So Russia started supporting separatist movements there. And it led to something of a civil war, something like that, something of a civil war. And then there was a popular plane crash in 2014, 2015, where a commercial jetliner was brought down by separatists. So this was the beginning of the issues Russia had with the West. Sanctions were placed on Russia for supporting separatists in that part. And basically, that is where the trouble with Ukraine started. So it's been going on for a while. It's not just a war that started overnight. It's been going on since about 8 years now. but just in the separatist areas. So what happened with the election of Zelensky about, I think, in 2019, the relations between the West and Ukraine was ramped up another level. So we have Ukraine that is basically not a member of the EU, having very high cooperation with the West. And this is not just economic cooperation. If it were just economic cooperation, it wouldn't be a problem. We have cooperation that is military in nature. If some of us remember, Donald Trump was under a lot of pressure during his administration to support the Ukrainians with lethal arms, which he eventually did under pressure. So we have the US funneling in a lot of lethal arms to Ukraine, which you would consider to be wrong. I mean, having no military cooperation with the country. So that's what happened in Ukraine. And then from Russia's point of view, I have my next door neighbor, which is my brother, or who I consider king, cooperating very closely with the US. And Russia began to see this as a form of existential threat. An existential threat is a threat that a nation sees as likely to affect their existence. Let me just explain this. Once a country is a NATO member, it has very close military cooperation with the US and Western Europe. And what this means is that the US can install missile systems in this country. So, I mean, the fear for Russia is that missile systems can land on their doorstep through Ukraine, and that will not be good for their existence. A case in point is the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where Soviet missiles were placed in Cuba. And then the reaction of the US is much like what Russia is doing today. Although the US did not invade, there was a last-minute agreement and missiles were removed. So that is for the background. Then we know that today is exactly 1 month and 2 days since the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians. The West also did not sit down idly. A lot of sanctions were slapped on Russia. A whole lot of sanctions were slapped on them. We have, there's a trade ban. I think Russian oil has been banned in the US and a number of states. Then the major project, which is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany, has been put on hold. A lot of financial sanctions. So I understand that $620 billion of Russian reserves being held in the West has been frozen. Just to put this in context, Benga, please, how much is Nigeria's foreign reserve? How much is our foreign reserve? I can't hear Benga. So I should think our reserve is somewhere around 40 billion. Fumi, can you correct me, please?
Yeah.
How much is our foreign reserve?
Yeah, last check around 40 to 50.
Okay, so just imagine about 630 billion. I just want to put it into context. Has been frozen. And the effect of that was that the Russian currency, which is the ruble, lost about 22% of value almost overnight. So many major international companies, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, just name them, all the ones from the West have pulled out of Russia almost overnight too. So those are the sanctions. And then all the people around the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, the oligarchs, they call them, all of them have been slapped with sanctions. So all of this is in a bid to get Russia to desist from this military intervention. The Russians on their part did not sit idly either. They also had countermeasures. For example, now Putin is saying that for every country that is not friendly to Russia, you have to pay for their oil and gas in rubles. So you're no longer paying in dollars, you're going to be paying in rubles. They have banned export of over 200 commodities. So Russians will not be exporting about 200 commodities. And then for people that have investments in Russia, people from the West and the US that have investments, they will not be paid any interest on Russian bonds, and all their investments have been practically frozen. So it's a tit for tat game that takes us back to something of the Cold War era, you know. So it's a terrible situation, especially for Ukraine, for Russia, and for the global economy. And there can't be war without humanitarian crisis. Many people will agree. A lot of people have been displaced because of this war.
Sorry, Femi. Sorry, let me.
Yes.
I just want to jump in because of what you said regarding Russia's response to the sanctions, and I just wanted your perspective. Do you think the sanctions from the West was too fast or somewhat miscalculated?
Okay. Like I said before, the sanctions have been in place since 2014, but not at this level.
Yeah.
They were just minor sanctions. And to be honest, I think the West just miscalculated, and they didn't expect that in 2022 that Russia will invade another country. So I think the sanctions were not late. I think they were really strong. I don't think since I've been how do they say this? Since I've been young and I've been old, I've not seen sanctions at this level against any country before. Maybe Iran.
Yeah.
So the sanctions have been really strong. Russia has been removed. Their major banks have been removed from SWIFT. Payment systems, MasterCard and Visa are no longer operational in Russia. So they've been basically what the West has done is to excommunicate Russia from the rest of the world. So you can't do business in Russia. So, I mean, this is bound to have a major impact on the economy. I think the sanctions were very strong. Joe Biden is a pro-Ukrainian person. I don't want to go back to his history, but sanctions were swift, they were strong, and the only problem with sanctions is that they may take a while to be effective. It might take from 12 months to 5 years. We really don't know what's going to happen with sanctions, but these sanctions are targeted at a policy change in Moscow, or probably even a regime change. Once all the oligarchs go broke and all the people in Russia, the people around Vladimir Putin are not happy, they might just call him to the side and say, bros, I know you are trying to protect us, but I think it's time you go. So those are the desired effects of the sanctions. I don't know if I answered your question correctly.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. So let's move to the humanitarian crisis. You wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, so I was saying that the truth about war is that it's ugly, it's dark, and it's sad. Within 1 week, we had about 3 million people flee Ukraine, especially from the areas around Kiev. And I always like to put things in perspective. 3 million people is like the size of Vancouver. I mean, that's more than the population of Vancouver. So imagine the whole of Vancouver trying to jump the border in about 1 week. It'll be very chaotic. It'll be very, very problematic. We also have a lot of people dying, a lot of lives have been lost, innocent people. We saw videos of apartment buildings being hit by missiles, hospitals, schools, crèche. You can just imagine that overnight, you can no longer go to work, you can no longer go to school, you can no longer safe where you are. It's a major problem. Even our kindred, we understand about 4,000 Nigerian students in Ukraine have had to suspend their schooling. Of course, schools are closed. And had to flee. So the UN, UNHCR, the United Nations trying to intervene to see how the humanitarian problem can be assisted. But the Russians are not helping anyway. So that is just a snippet. That's just a snapshot of the current situation in Ukraine. Thank you for
Femi, thank you so much. That was not a snapshot. That was an entire lecture on background gist, history, and then current situation. But I think that was quite elaborate because you gave a clear picture of the past, the current situation, and the immediate impact on humans, which really will be the humanitarian crisis we're experiencing. So Binga, I want to jump to you because from the last thing Femi said, for example, just even thinking about the thousands of students that in the first 2 weeks of the attack got trapped in Ukraine. And, mind you, Ukraine, Russia, and a major part of the Eastern Europe is where Nigerian middle-class families find more affordable than places like the UK, the US, or Canada to send their kids to. So the next category you think of when you think of education exports, humans that we send from most parts of the developing world actually, will be Ukraine and Russia. And a lot of countries got hit. For example, India had over 20,000 students initially trapped there for the first 1 or 2 weeks. So, Binga, I would like you to just talk to the impact of that crisis back at home. We know a number of issues we've seen. We've talked about wheat. We've heard about wheat in the news. We've heard about the crude oil price opportunity that opened up and all of that. So I'd just like you to speak to some of the key impacts, either opportunities that we can also look at and what we should expect to experience in Nigeria as a result of the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
Thanks, Fumi. So I'm going to start from where we stopped. That's about the impact it's having, the humanitarian impact. Like Femi said, we have about 4,000 Nigerian students studying in Ukraine. And just like you said also, Ukraine and Russia and some part of Eastern Europe has become the destination for education for Nigerians and some other Africans who intend to study courses like medicine and some tech courses. So the Nigerian government has done something responsible by trying to evacuate the students, and this was estimated to have cost about $8.2 million. This money, if this had not occurred, $8.2 million would have been diverted into something more productive. And if you look at these guys who have gone to study abroad, after their studies, a couple of them still stay back in Ukraine, or they find their way into other European or developed countries. And these people, you expect that they would form part of those Nigerians who will be sending funds back home to family and friends. So in a way, this is going to impact adversely on potential diaspora remittances that we expect to see in the coming years. So Russia is the second largest exporter of crude oil globally, and its output is pivotal into determining the international crude oil prices. So due to this Russia-Ukraine war, there's a lot of, and we know there's, like Femi said, there's been a lot of economic sanctions on Russia by influential Western countries. It has led to international crude oil prices trading at over $100 per barrel for the first time since October 2014. As an oil exporting nation, Nigeria is supposed to take out, this is supposed to be good news. However, we're not taking full advantage of this because we are producing less than our capacity, and we import refined petroleum products into Nigeria. Based on OPEC's production data of February 2022, Nigeria's output is about 1.4 million barrels per day, as against 1.7 that we should be doing. So we are operating below capacity, and this is not, so the increase, we are not really feeling the full impact of the increase in prices of crude oil internationally. If we're operating at full capacity, then the impact would have been felt better. Also, what makes matters worse is that we import refined petroleum products into Nigeria. This comes in at a high price because we have to transport it down. If we're refining locally, it would have been better. You can see that the prices of petroleum products has increased. On the average, diesel is selling for about $700 naira per liter. So this has, unfortunately, this has coincided with the collapse of the national grid in Nigeria. And we also had, recently we had the issue of adulterated premium motor spirit, also known as petrol, imported into the country, which led to some form of scarcity. So when you put all this together, it adversely impacts on production. A lot of organizations had to cut back on work hours because it was really high. It was really difficult trying to manage the cost of energy and powering. I mean, there was no energy because of the collapse of the national grid. So it was a difficult thing. So when you put all this together, cutting of production hours would adversely impact on our GDP. And it's not too good when looking at it from that aspect. Then, I mean, also we should also look at the issue of subsidy. The removal of subsidy was supposed to take effect from July 2022. But on the 25th of January, the president of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, after consulting various stakeholders, decided to extend subsidy for another 18 months. According to Minister of National Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, the federal government is going to use $2.2 billion, which was the proceeds from recently raised Eurobonds to fund subsidy. This is if this war between Russia and Ukraine persists and oil prices continue to trade at the current level it is in, it means that we might have to borrow more in the future to manage this subsidy or to fund subsidy. And it's not too good because our debt profile is already at a worrisome stage. So borrowing further is just because we want to fund subsidy as a result of high oil prices isn't good. Then we also have, you spoke about wheat and everything, and Russia and Ukraine they are major producers of wheat globally. And Nigeria imports massively from these guys. Russia is second, and I think Ukraine is fifth globally. And because of all the sanctions, the prices of wheat has gone up. And wheat is used for production of bread and other staples like spaghetti, macaroni, and the rest of them. And this has impacted adversely on the cost of commodities like bread. So the average Nigerian family is feeling the impact of this. It's not too good for. And if we also look at maize, Ukraine is one of the largest producers of maize. Maize is supposed to be like a substitute to wheat. So the price of maize has also increased in the international markets. Then if you also look at it from the perspective of fertilizer, also Russia and Ukraine are major producers of fertilizer globally. They account for, together, I think they account for about 35% of fertilizer. And this is also going to have an adverse effect on the supply of fertilizer globally, as well as the price. But the good thing for us, or the good news for us, is that we have the Dangote fertilizer plant that we hope would take advantage of this situation. Then Nigeria also has some other personal interests, and we all know the Ajaokuta steel mills. And I think of recent, Nigeria has gone into talks with Russia on how to revive the Ajaokuta steel mill. But these conversations cannot proceed because I don't think Nigeria would want to incur the wrath of the big nations who have sanctioned Russia. So I think this would be put on hold.
So Winga, you're basically emphasizing other points that we've been hearing a lot of lately, which is global food crisis. And obviously, we're already dealing with about 17% in inflation rates this year in the country. And not to talk about the fact that with us depending on countries like Russia and Ukraine for staple items, which should, bread, it is every man's food. The guy on the street, even if he can't get a decent meal, he could possibly just take bread off the petty trader on the streets. So, and as we look at agriculture, we look at food crisis, we look at the FX exposure of what's happening in Ukraine. I think like we can talk about the impact of the recent CBN policy, RT200. I know it's supposed to address the FX shortage issues, and we're also supposed to look at how is it going to drive the non-oil exports sectors of the economy. So I feel like it's a good time to go into it. Except Femi, maybe you want to add anything to what Benga already said. If not, I think we can move.
Okay, thank you for me. Benga mentioned that this situation is going to lead to food inflation. And I don't know if my figures are right. I think food inflation is already higher than regular inflation. It's about 3% year on year. So I don't know, maybe people will not even have anything to eat anymore.
Wow. We have to do something. we have to actually give the fact that Nigeria can do a lot more. I know, Gwenga, you talk about diversification, and I really don't like to talk so much about diversification because we've heard it for most part of our lives, probably even from high school you've heard it. But let's just talk about the RT200 policy. So if you can give us a bit of overview, what it's supposed to do or what the CBN is trying to achieve, and then what your own thinking and perspective is in terms of implementation.
Okay, the RT200 program is a laudable one, in my opinion. I think it's something that is long overdue, and it shows that the CBN is thinking, and they are saying, although I think it's coming a bit late, it should have come. Something like this should have come up a couple of years ago, but it's better late than never. So on the 10th of February, the CBN had a bankers committee meeting, and the governor of the central bank, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, launched this new policy, and it's aimed at driving in about $200 billion within the next 3 to 5 years. And for a long time, for many years, we've depended solely on oil as the major source of FX. The aim is to grow non-oil proceeds of FX, and it's better late than never. So they want to increase the foreign exchange inflows, diversify FX income, looking at the non-oil exports, trying to expand what we get in that regard. Then they also want to ensure a steady FX inflow, because our FX inflow has been vulnerable based on how the international crude oil prices go. When it's going high, it indicates that there's going to be more inflow, and when prices dwindle, it reduces what we get. So if we grow the non-oil export side, we are going to we won't just be growing that. We won't just be having an increased FX inflow from that side. We would be able to stabilize. So when things are not going well from the oil side, I mean, we'll have a cushion to fall back on. So it's also aiming at adding value and maybe creating jobs and employment locally, rather than us exporting our commodities at a crude state or rather than exporting agricultural products, it also aims at adding value, processing them to semi-finished goods, or in some cases, if possible, finished goods if we have the technology, and getting more value, getting more dollars for what we export. So, like I said earlier, the hope is to get about $200 billion in foreign exchange, and the government has put, or the CBN has put in a lot of other things. It's anchored on five cardinal points. The first one is looking at value adding exports. They are going to give preference to that. Then they're also going to give they're also going to focus on non-oil commodities expansion facility, then non-oil FX rebate scheme, dedicated non-oil export terminal, and they would have a biannual non-oil export summit. So the CBN is going to dole out funds in form of loans to various manufacturers and producers who they think would add value to non-oil exports, and it's going to be at a very an affordable rate, 5% for 10 years with 2 years moratorium period. And there are other incentives, like they'll be giving 65 naira for every $1 they repatriate and is sold to other parties. Well, when they repatriate and sell in the I&E windows, they're going to get 35 naira for $1. I think this is a very good initiative, and my fears are that the CBN governor is not going to be there forever. So if and when a new CBN governor comes, if he should continue with this, I think it would impact positively going forward. Then we also need to educate people, educate manufacturers to understand that there's an opportunity regarding this. When I say opportunity regarding this, I'm talking about the loan, the facilities, and everything the CBN has put together for them to take advantage of.
So thanks, Benga, but I was also thinking maybe it could be a bit more specific, because sometimes the policies make sense at a technical level, but at the granular consumer level, sometimes we feel very detached from it. So what are the key sectors that we think, because you've mentioned manufacturing, and I was thinking things around arts and culture, exporting our entertainment could also be instrument. Maybe the RT200 could also favor that, yeah, given the fact that we have a very youthful population, which knows to be quite creative. So I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, they're also looking at IT and creative businesses. So those people in art and entertainment also would benefit from this.
Okay.
We also export entertainment. We export, our guys are going out and we sell our entertainment products outside the shore of the country. So it is one of the sectors that the CBN is looking at also.
So I have a bit of a flip question now. So what do you think? You've mentioned change in CBN governor could be one of the stumbling blocks we'll see to this policy at the end of the day, in terms of ability to deliver over a long period of time. So what are the other challenges you see regarding this into the future?
I hope this would not be politicized. That it would be done on merit, okay, and it wouldn't create. There wouldn't be bottlenecks where corrupt government officials would capitalize on this to enrich themselves.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Femi. Is there anything you would like to share? I know you have experience working with the SME segment. So maybe based on that perspective, if there's any opinion you have regarding the
Thank you. I think I'm going to share Benga's optimism at believing that the government is going to follow through, the CBN is going to follow through on this. And basically, from what I understand, it's just to encourage non-oil exports. So we're looking at people that are doing things that are value adding. So basically, we're not just looking at the primary export commodities. We're not looking at commodities alone. Things, finished goods that can bring more effects into the country to help the already tight situation. So I think I'm hopeful too. For once, I think Emefiele, let me not say for once, I think this time Emefiele is going to get it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you so much, Benga. Then thank you, Femi. So I'm trying to see if I have questions here. Okay, I don't have questions yet, but typically what we also do is, this is just the live streaming version of the event. Once we upload and Ecofinar has questions, a number of those questions we responded to, where the questions are directed to any of you, Femi or Benga, we can also take that. But I don't know if anyone wants to add their perspective to the conversation. We have just 5 minutes and I can take participants who want to add their voice to what we've discussed today. So you could just use the raise hand emoji. So I'm taking this for my desktop, if not allowing how, but if I have any hand raised, I will call the person to just share their thoughts, then we can call it a day. So let's see. Okay. So if anyone wants to add their voice to conversation, please use the raise hand emoji, then I will call you. Okay, while we wait for that, Femi, I'm just curious, just off the top of my head, I'm wondering, how long do you think Ukraine will be able to stand the crisis?
Thank you, Fumi, for that question. The thing about wars is that we often know how they start or when they start, but it's difficult to say when they will end. From what I understand from reports on the media, Western media, because we don't know that we're not getting reports from the East. RT has been blocked here in Canada. So, but what we understand is that there's a stalemate where Russian forces have not been able to advance beyond where they were about 2 weeks into the war. And there are a lot of losses on the ground, both Ukrainian and Russian. But Ukraine is having a bit of an advantage, if I should say, because a lot of weapons, even men, are coming in from the West. The West is supporting Ukraine with supplies, with lethal arms. But to be honest, I don't see a position where Ukrainian forces will be able to overrun the Russian forces and then push them back out of the country. So if we say how long, the best solution here is, in my opinion, to have a negotiated ceasefire. Then maybe from there we can have some peace, because the Ukrainian president has indicated in this direction. He mentioned that joining NATO is not something they are looking at the moment. He has backtracked from that. He's also mentioned that he's ready to negotiate on the situation in the Donbass. So he's ready to negotiate with Russia on autonomy for those parts of the country that have declared themselves independent. For me, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it was interesting that once I asked that question, someone dropped a question similar to this, except maybe another piece to it is, what do we think either side will consider as a victory? So what will Russia possibly consider as victory, and what will Ukraine consider as victory? I know Zelensky right now seems to be more focused on, he's carrying a lot of empathetic approach to leadership here. And I think that's also coming from his days as an entertainer. He knows how to drive the audience in a direction that he wants it to go. But I get the same vibe as you, Femi, that pretty much I think right now the destruction is so much, the capital investment that will be required to get Ukraine back on track is going to require a lot of support. If he's also backing out of NATO, then at the end of the day, the question becomes, so why are we doing all this fight to start with? So, but I would still like to hear what you think on what you think victory would mean for either party.
Thank you, Fumi. You know, Zelensky is a former satirist, a comedian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he has that effect. He knows how to engage people. He has advanced communication skills. So the question is, what either will consider a victory? I think for Russia, to be honest, they might not be winning the war, but they are closer to their objective. A victory for Russia is that Ukraine does not join NATO at all cost. Ukraine does not become a member of NATO, and that for the Russian-speaking part of the East, that is the Donbass, that they have some autonomy. Those places have actually declared themselves independent. So for Russia, the strategy is to still have some influence over Ukraine. And with the separatists, with the self-determination in the East, in the Donbass area, that will give them inroads into Ukraine. Basically, the NATO policy does not allow any country that has disputed borders. So if there's a border dispute in a country, that country cannot be admitted into NATO. So for Russia, their end game is to continue to destabilize Ukraine and to ensure that they don't join NATO. And I think for Ukraine, from the Ukrainian perspective, if I was Zelensky, the truth about it is that the biggest loser here is Ukraine. Ukrainians are dying, be it military, be it civilian. Yeah. The economy has been suspended. And like you mentioned, a lot of things have been destroyed. Let's say the war ends this afternoon. It might take Ukraine 10 years or 15 years to get back to where they were in January. So I think a victory for Ukraine will be to see a ceasefire in place, an effective ceasefire in place, and to see how they can restart their economy and get people that have left to come back. And then for the areas in the Donbass, I think that would be the major sticking points. Even if there's a ceasefire, I don't know how far Ukraine will be willing to make any concessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. And Binga, I'd like a final word from you, whatever direction you want to take it, be it some sort of advice, encouragement, any direction you feel like taking it, just some final words from you too. If it's to tell us, have hope in RT200, start a business in XYZ, whatever it is, just would like to hear some final words from you.
Okay, so wars are not good. So a war doesn't determine who is right. Like a friend said, at the end of the day, people will suffer. The vulnerable, children, women, and a lot of people will suffer. Businesses will suffer. So I think the earlier the war ends, the better for everybody. And the Nigerian government should also think about this. Is supposed to be this increase in the price of crude oil globally would have been very good for us. But because we do not refine our products, petroleum products locally, whenever for the average Nigerian, it's the price of crude oil is like a double-edged sword. If it goes very high, Nigerians will suffer because there'll be the likelihood for the pump price of fuel to increase. If it goes low, you would hear that the government doesn't have enough revenue to fund projects and the rest of them. So the government should think about maybe licensing modular refineries and look at how to attract investors into that area. If we can take out the demand for foreign for refined imported refined petroleum products, is going to go a long way to stabilize the naira. And they should also look at taking advantage of, because we also import a lot of our, our import bill is very high. This is also weakening the naira. Let's think of growing the naira by buying things that we produce locally, and it should start from the top. It should start from people in government. I like what the new governor of Anambra State has done by making a locally assembled car his official car. I think other governors should think about that. They should think about buying things that would add value to the naira. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I think Olalekan's hand was raised, but it's down now. So I'm hoping maybe we've also spoken to the question it might have had. But okay, let me see. So we literally have 1 more minute. So we have just 1 minute left. So is it Mike? Mike's hand is raised, but
Hello?
Yeah, Olalekan, can you just quickly say what you have to say in possibly 10 seconds?
10 seconds is too small for me.
Try, give it a shot, you can.
Okay, no problem. Okay. This was a very fantastic presentation by the panelists and Adebusola. This is a good one, but my own question is around the Nigerian issuing Eurobond at this very tough time. And there was a report I saw, I think last week, that this international rating agency fixed the rated Nigerian bond B, so which is not really good investment grade for Nigeria. So if we are going to international bond markets to issue bond at this level, and bearing in mind that the US just increased their interest rates from band of 0.25 to band of 0.5.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to cost a lot for Nigeria, because what that will mean is that a lot of investors from emerging markets might be looking towards what do they call it, developed nations to invest their money, but they are seeking for more returns. So now that if US is doing that, then we also see Bank of England move in the same direction. Do you get it? So I believe it's a double blow for Nigeria. So I don't know if Benga can give more clarity on that. I'm just afraid what it will mean for Nigeria.
Yeah, so issuing of Eurobond is a sensitive issue. The first thing is because the cost for us that we are issuing, when you issue a bond in a foreign currency, the cost you are incurring is not just the yield that you've priced into the bond. There's also the depreciation of your local currency. So at the moment, the official rate is about 420 thereabout. If we issue a bond now, let's say a 20-year bond, and in 20 years' time, the naira is about in the neighborhood of 600 and something naira. So we are going to be paying like 1.5 times of what we've borrowed. Apart from that, I spoke about the issue of borrowings used to finance subsidy and worrisome debt profile. We stand the risk of being degraded if this persists. And when a country is degraded, there's something called sovereign ceiling. Every organization, be it corporate or sub-government within that country, cannot be rated higher than that. So it means that companies will also have to borrow at a higher cost. And this would impact on the economy adversely. So I think the government should also explore other options like bilateral loans rather than commercial loans that have lower rates. Then they should think of going into partnerships. They should identify projects that they can go into partnerships where foreign counterparties can fund and get their returns rather than taking loans.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Benga. And just to add a bit more context for the developing world's perspective to the increase in interbank lending rates, the other thing driving that is their own local inflation rates.
Yes.
So yes, they have high inflation. So the increase in the lending rate over there isn't driven by whatever is really going on globally, but more of an attempt to manage the current inflation rate there, which has gotten worse because of the Ukraine-Russia crisis, which will also back to January. I remember we talked about the supply chain crisis, which was also affecting local inflation rates. Now we have oil prices affecting their own local inflation rate. So a number of factors are impacting that. And unfortunately, whatever happens in the developing world, the West, where most of the developing markets like Nigeria would reach out to for capital ingestion, will definitely take a hit from there. So like Benga said, we need to really look inward, deepen our exports, because once we can deepen our own products and services and the value we add to our exports, then we can really definitely manage issues around valuation of our Naira. We can then manage issues around what our FX reserves are also looking like. So I think that was a very good question from Nikon. So I want to quickly jump to Mike. Ecofinar has been gracious to us today to add 5 minutes to this call, so we can just quickly wrap up with a comment or question from Mike.
I'll replace, just for the lack of time, I'll replace my question with thanking the panelists for doing such a thorough job, and also to you, Fumi, for shaping the conversation. My thing is always about the common man, really, and it's just painful to see, as Femi stated, what impact this has on the ordinary person. You know, people fleeing their homes, children not knowing what is happening and being displaced all of a sudden. And, you know, this reverberates even just beyond Ukraine and Russia, as we see, even in Nigeria as well and all of the world. And I just thought when Benga was talking about wheat going up in price, how give us our daily bread is now a powerhouse prayer, so to speak. Just thank you very much, Femi and Benga, and to you too, Fumi, for the job well done.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. It was also good to hear from you. Thank you. So guys, would call it a day. Please watch out for the next edition. We'd like to have everyone on the call, and I'm hoping the next one really will create more time to just take maybe 2 or 3 comments like this, given the time constraints we might have, or whatever it is, we'll work around it. I think this has been a fantastic conversation with you, Femi and Benga. Thank you so much. Femi, I had an entire history class today. I didn't need to fly anywhere to get that. I got that straight from you. So I think that was good. Benga, thank you for bringing so much light to the CBN's policy. And for participants, thank you so much for joining us. I know we could really be somewhere else, but we've all chosen to spend our Saturday together. And let's stay hopeful, because that's critical. Let's stay committed to whatever businesses we're doing, trying to give it the best shots we can. And I think as long as humans remain hopeful, the economy will work in our favor, because the law of demand and supply is driven solely by how we think and how we feel and how we react. So if we choose positive reactions, then maybe we'll be able to navigate the system. And if people make sure they register for elections next year, then maybe they'll be able to speak boldly by 2023. So let's have a fantastic Saturday. And I wish everyone here a beautiful day. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.